Thank you. I played that piece in a concert in Calcutta a few years ago. And afterwards, a gentleman came up to me and he said, that piece you played, it's a very famous Indian raga. I said, no, it isn't. He said, yes, the beginning of the piece, very famous. I said, no, it's actually from Lancashire in England, where I'm from, surprisingly. And it comes from 1450. It's really old. He said, no, it's a 1,000-year-old Indian raga. I said, greatest respect, you're wrong. And then he sang it to me, note perfectly, note for note for note. At which point I realized I knew absolutely nothing about music. This isn't unusual, it happens quite often. I mean, Lancashire is a very long way from India. And short of Alexander the Great coming to England before he pillaged his way up to Delhi, there's no way that piece could have traveled, but it just happened at the same time. And what I want to talk to you today about is how music is kind of everywhere, and sometimes it's in a cloud. Now, you all being very literate digital people will often talk about, I'm saying you, will often talk about things being in the cloud. When I talk about things being in the cloud, that's what I mean. It's kind of quite weird, and it gave me goosebumps when I thought about it. Flash forward a few years. This is some kids that I work with in Harlem who are super cool, and I take in an orchestra occasionally to work with them. And they're really good violinists, these guys. They're all on free school meals, and they don't actually have any sort of classical background, which is quite cool, because when you play music to them that they haven't heard before, they'll give you a really fresh response. And so I did an experiment. I had an orchestra with me called the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields, who are very British, very straight-laced, great, but Harlem is not a natural home for them. And I thought, let's do a little experiment. And so we played them some music, this piece here. And I said to the kids who are all sitting down like you, very quiet, very polite, what I want you to do is close your eyes. Not you, this is me speaking to them. I want you to close your eyes and imagine that you're in the cinema, and after we finish playing, don't clap, just tell me what you saw. So we played this piece, and it finished, and this kid stuck his hand up. I said, yeah, yes, you're a 10-year-old kid. Right, what did you see? I won't do his accent, don't worry. So he said, there are these hills, these mountains, and they're really big, and they're green, they're covered in grass, but they used to be volcanoes. I was like, okay. And they're really grassy, they're covered in grass. Yeah, we know that. And it's in France. Okay. But they were volcanoes. And there's a boy, and he's really sad, and he's sitting down, and he's sad because he's a shepherd, and one of his sheep has gone missing, and so he's playing the flute, because it makes him a bit happier. And also, the sheep knows the tune, so he'll come back. And I said, that's incredible, because that piece is called The Little Shepherd. At which point, I realized I knew absolutely nothing about music again. And whenever I think about that, it gives me goosebumps. Stick your hand up if you had a little goosebump rush about that. Great, you are human. I'm being so rude. Sorry. I'm not nervous. I'm not, I'm afraid. It's one of my problems. And I thought that was incredible, because there's no way he would have heard this piece of music before. He certainly wouldn't have been told what it was. And it's a piano piece by Debussy. It's not totally obscure. But he just instantly had absolute... I mean, that is exactly what Debussy is describing. And what was also lovely is afterwards I had a letter from that... Well, after that visit, a letter from the group. And they'd each written something in there. And one of them that I love, and I treasure this to this day, he said, I like writing music. Not him. I like writing music. Music makes me feel important. And this is a 10-year-old kid writing classical music for a classical orchestra to play in the Lincoln Center. But in doing so, in him teaching someone sort of supposedly grown up how to do something, it gave him a massive sense of identity. And that's kind of really important, because the moment you kind of get ownership of something, it kind of makes you grow a little bit taller. And when you make a kid have ownership of something, they grow a foot taller in front of you. Getting that goosebump thing in a kid. Getting that kind of hook is vitally important. Now, we all know that music is a very clever thing. It's abstract. And supposedly, there's a massive industry, particularly in America, the country I come from, that supposedly says, if you listen to Mozart, it will make you more intelligent. So this whole generation of poor children who are being sat down to do their homework whilst Mozart is blasted in their faces. Mozart didn't listen to Mozart. It's a ridiculous thing to do. Saying that listening to Mozart makes you intelligent is like saying if you watch the Olympics, it'll make you fit. I've watched a lot of sport. What? I hadn't finished that sentence. Very rude. So there's a brilliant experiment done. I would argue that playing Mozart does have a tangible effect. Playing classical music, actually, forget classical, that's nonsense. I don't understand the term anyway. Playing music actually does change the way your brain wires. We know that. Just as going for a run will probably help you get fit. The doing, not the consuming. So I also kind of want to talk a little bit about being a producer, not a consumer. And that's massively important. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but I keep having to remind myself. Anyway, scroll back a few years, and there's a chap called Jan Panksepp who does a brilliant experiment. He gets a group of subjects in a room, and he plays them the Mozart Sonata for 2 pianos. And see all their reactions. And they stand around. Nothing. No response. He plays it again, like, nothing. So he decides to change tack a bit. So he plays some music by these chaps. This is a band called Pink Floyd, from where I come from. An amazing thing happens. He plays the final cut. And at a particular chord sequence, they all ruffled their feathers at the same time. Oh, I should have said they're chickens, by the way. I didn't mention that. Which was amazing, because actually, he put it on again. He thought, that's very strange. There must be a breeze in this barn. He played it again. At the same chord sequence, the same thing happened. They all ruffled their feathers. Chickens were having goosebumps. So animals have this kind of dopamine rush as well. I mean, music's about 2 things, sex and death. And that's why animals use music as well. I know that's a bit shocking, but you've had Cindy Gallop up here. Nothing I'm going to say is going to shock anybody. So these were chickens, and of course, chickens themselves produce music. I love this drawing. This is an engraving by a guy called Athanasius Kircher, who's one of those people who just seem to embrace everything all at the same time, proper Renaissance man. And he's actually notated everything absolutely correctly. And you can play those, and I won't play a chicken at you. Not yet. You're not ready. And it's just incredible. It's kind of perfect. This is his passport photo. Bit of a dude. Bit of a hipster. This photo was taken in 1655. He's rocking the square hat. He's kind of borrowed it a bit from the papal market. But he was an incredible man. He was someone who didn't know the possibility of not being able to do stuff. No one had said, you can't. So he invented the first music laptop computer. I'm not joking. This is actually a box into which you drop wooden cards, the software, and from which you can generate billions upon billions of unique melodies and hundreds of different unique instrumentations. It's astounding. I mean, no one's managed to quite, you know, GarageBand doesn't really reach this, frankly. No offense. And this is in 1650. You know, we think we're very clever now, very sophisticated. 1650 from a man who wasn't a musician. Not only that, he invented the Sonos entertainment system as well. So what you had was you'd rig up your house with these big kind of helical spiral devices that would go out to the wall, like a massive inverted speaker, and then pick up all the street noises. Someone being mugged, someone propositioning someone else, some horses and stuff doing horsey things. And the sound would spiral its way through this kind of helix, back up through into the mouth of a sculpture, where it frightened the bejesus out of a house guest. I love this man. I mean, this is extraordinary science. And it's funny. He didn't stop there either. He was playing around with the idea of kind of music of the spheres. You know, maybe I can devise an organ that somehow plays the entire universe of everything we know. I mean, a bit of a megalomaniac, admittedly, but he drew the designs. Not sure if it's been done yet. Absolutely astounding. Not only that, he also invented the cataphone. True. True. This was just a theoretical drawing. Apparently, he didn't actually make the prototype where you press a key, it pulls a cat's tail, and they go meow. Because you can't tune cats, unfortunately. It's maybe something we can try out in the hangar. I don't know. Just an extraordinary man. But again, animals making music, not voluntarily, admittedly. Music's a crazy thing. It's all about kind of getting from one point to another, about kind of getting from point A to point B. Now, I used to teach the cello a lot. I play a bit. It's not my main job. And sometimes I've had students that have to play scales. And when a student comes in to play scales, and you've got an hour and a half of it, it's bad for them. It's really bad for you, the teacher. It's deadly. It's horrendous. And normally, they will play a scale, sort of something like this. You get the idea. It's not really music. But if we take the same thing and we give it a shape, stretching it at either end, something weird happens. Suddenly it develops kind of meaning. And yet, those are sort of meaningless notes. But because what we've done is we've phrased them, it ends up sounding like it must be musical, therefore it must mean something, therefore something important's being conveyed. And loads of artists have played with this idea. This is Paul Clay's pedagogical sketchbook, which is just brilliant. I'm not sure he really intended it at first to be for public consumption, but the whole thing is him trying to work out the energy of how one line gets across the page to another. And I often I've met quite a few people here who will say, oh, I'm not musical, I wish I was musical. Saying you're not musical is like saying you don't believe in oxygen. It doesn't make any sense. It's absolutely true. You're born musical. Did you know you're actually born with perfect pitch? All my Korean cello students have perfect pitch because they've retained it, because in their language, the difference between certain sounds of the letter R is crucially important in knowing meaning. Therefore, they've retained those synapses, those connections in their brain. It's kept. Everyone is musical. All of you are musical. Music's in everything. It's trying to find, though, what Hogarth called the line of beauty, this sense of being able to get kind of from one thing to the other through a nice curve. And this is what makes something musical. It actually is that intent. If I don't play, or the band here don't play with intent, it will fall flat. If you play like you mean it, even if you've made it up yourself, even if you're one of those kids in Harlem who's making up a tune, if you play it like you mean it, if you play it like your life depends on it, it will move someone else. It might even give them goosebumps. Admittedly, that scale wouldn't give anyone goosebumps. If it did, you've got a serious problem. Now, people often say that architecture is frozen music. Oh, wow, what a lovely thing to say. But that seems to me a bit passive, and it doesn't seem to have any sense with actually what music's about. And when there's a cliche like that, it's quite fun inverting it. And I would say, in answer to that, well, maybe music is liquid architecture. Maybe music itself is this kind of permanent four-dimensional thing in flux that's got this capacity to kind of twist us emotionally. And it's kind of an extraordinary thing, the way it works, because it can move you. It can have a big sort of an emotional kick. And back to Kircher here. I mean, he understood that. He was able to find sounds in nature and kind of notate them down. And he's one of these people who probably, like a lot of people here, took relentless notes and was trying to find things in nature. What I particularly love about this, by the way, is his sense of humor comes through again. You've got the crow, is what it notates. Excuse me for singing. You've got a quail going, these are all correct pitches. It's incredible. You've got this parrot dude who's the kind of Jerry Garcia of the group, who, if my Greek is correct, if you phonetically say that out loud, you're saying crazy, which I really like. Anyway, that's apropos nothing. I take relentless notes. My job is writing film music, is writing scores, and I have to sometimes come up with music on the fly, and I'm going to try and do that today. Just one quick note, I don't have a timer, so I have no idea where I am, and I don't want to keep these people too long. So I take copious notes wherever I go. This is a frightening glimpse into my world, but when I'm notating stuff, I sometimes have this feeling that the way I'm writing it down, sometimes it's a bit boring. And I like being influenced by things from the 15th, 16th, 17th century. Because I do think sometimes by looking as far back as you can go really, really far forward. Sometimes the answer of how to progress is reaching back as far as you possibly can into history. Because you'll probably find it's already been done. And it might have been done in a way that hasn't actually been resurfaced. It might trigger something in your brain. So I had to write a piece of music recently for a friend of mine who's... He works at Pixar, and his nickname is Wave. I thought, well, I'll try and come up with something that is playable, but maybe is kind of for him. So I did this. This is one of my stupid scores. And this is a Wave score. It's obviously stolen from Hiroshige. It is completely playable. And because I really like this guy, Kircher, I thought I'd put a seagull in it too. I'm not going to play the piece, but I will show you how the seagull works, which is basically, it's a terrible trick across the top, but it's just... It's just that. Cheap trick. Anyway, but sometimes notation doesn't go too well. This is a piece, an arrangement for a band in England that I had to send across an orchestra in another country, and they said, can you fax it through to us? Yeah, absolutely. Not realizing the fax had come through like that. They recorded it like that anyway. It actually sounded much better than what I would have come out with. Now, I want to just share one little story with you. Talking about music in the cloud, my daughter came home, one of my daughters came home, and she said, Dad, it's show and tell this week. I went, oh, how American. What do you want to do? She said, well, I'd like to send a piece of music into space, please, Dad. Okay. Actually, I think there's a way of doing that. A friend of mine who's a flute player, really good flute player, happened at that time to be on the space station. She's an astronaut called Katie Coleman, and she was stuck up there for 6 months. So this is my daughter, Marilena. She decided to sit down and write a little piece for Katie. And I said, okay, I've got her email address. We can actually send this up to space. She went, oh, great. She said, I'll write them a note as well. So it basically says, Dear Katie, thanks so much for the present. She sent her a present before she went into space. Absolutely love it. Thanks so much. I hope you're having a great time in space. And she wrote her this piece. And she wrote a piece called Stars in the Sky for flute. I won't play it now. But it's lovely. And it's kind of, she knew where the blobs went on the lines. And she thought, I'll just play with it because, you know, I think this will sound nice. And she sent it. And she said, you know, can you play it on your flute in space? And so Katie sent back this picture. She played it on her flute in space. And it was the greatest show and tell ever. Except that the teacher said to me, your daughter has a really vivid imagination and we kind of need to talk about this. So she didn't believe her. Now, it would be great to do a Q&A, and I know people get very shy in this situation, so I've got a few questions for you. Do you think Jonathan Ive gets really, really, really pissed off with predictive text? I think he probably does. I've had to work for the royal families of various countries in working with the Olympics, and it's very hard to make the Queen happy. I know we're in Quebec, slightly dodgy ground. There's a very easy way to make the Queen happy. I did this in a hotel room last night. It's a very expensive effect, very simple, definitely worth doing when you get home and showing your kids. Can you tell us a funny story about North Korea? Yes, I can. Thank you for asking me that. I had to rearrange the national anthem of North Korea as part of my work on the Olympics. Sent it to Kim Jong-un, not Il, but Un, the previous one, who approved it. This is him approving it. And then he died, which was rude. And because he'd approved it before he died, they can only ever use my version in the future. So that's my North Korean story, which is ridiculous. Anyway, we're going to have a few questions. But before that, I just want to throw a few thoughts at you. This is a cello, obviously. It's one of those tools. It's a piece of technology that's reached its peak. And there's a good point at which to say, stop the development, and then kind of you then have to reach it, if that makes sense. It's like a piano. You can't really improve the design of a piano. You can change the chassis, you can change the look of it, but it's hit an apotheosis, it's hit a peak of design. And, you know, I've got a laptop. I've killed 7 laptops in a row. My laptop will be dead next year, with the greatest respect, not naming any companies. My cello, which is it's my new, I call it my modern cello because it's from 1750, the other one's from 1692, will still be around in 300 years' time. I won't, some of you won't either. Because it's reached, that is what it is. So it's my job to try and improve technically to kind of reach it. I'd say the same goes for a pencil. A pencil is a peak of design. I used to work with Alexander McQueen, the fashion designer, and he'd go, oh, I've got this idea for a show. This is how he talked. And he'd sit there, he'd draw, just like this. And he was like a virtuoso violinist with a pencil. It was like, oh, it's so beautiful. He goes, oh, so long, and he's working from this bit, like that. Utterly incredible. And this guy was just connected this pencil from his brain. I don't need a stylus and an iPad, with the greatest respect. Pencil. This is Raphael drawing some hands. People talk about digital technology. These are digits. That's digital technology. Thank you. One other thing. Mistakes, cock-ups are sometimes the best thing you can ever do. Please make loads of cock-ups. Sorry, that's very rude. Make lots of mistakes, embrace them. It's not a bad thing, it's a great thing. Again, you know this, but please do remember it. And make sure that everything that you do has something about it that will give you goosebumps when you tell somebody else what it is you've done. Whether it's designing a new spigot for something, whether it's a piece of software, whether it's a piece of art your kid's done and you stick it on the fridge. That's right. If you haven't got that, you're not going to love what you do. And I'm sorry for preaching at you, but I meet so many people who say, oh, I wish I could do what I dream of. Goosebumps. Look for the goosebumps. Remember that. Remember that. That's what gets me up every day. So, any questions? Got time for a couple. And then I want to play you something short. Great, you're very shy. Perfect. If you've got any questions, that's called a Twitter account, okay? Twitter me, whatever you say, and oh, sorry, we do have a question. Oh, yeah, hello. Don't be shy.
Well, thanks. I was in a bad need of being confused in a good way, and you achieved that. Thank you for that. I guess my question is an open one. What's the place of random in music?
Oh.
Randomness.
Easy. Randomness is when you take whatever's in the room with no preconception and you play it. And thank you for queuing it up, because I'm going to try and do that after Welby talks. I love walking on stage and not knowing what I'm going to play, which is what I do. And that's what I generally try to do. That. The feeling of actually walking out on stage and thinking, I have literally no idea what I'm going to do or say, is actually kind of really liberating. And in music, you can do that, because music starts from a place of abstraction, and once you kind of go into the idea of phrasing and meaning, it then means something. So thank you. You've kind of tied that up for me very nicely. I would like, because we're in Canada, I'd like to finish with something Canadian. And in 1995, I was really lucky to be involved in a concert where this guy walked on stage. He missed a sound check. He was so late, and he didn't know where he was. He walked on stage, and he opened this exercise book, and the words were high or low depending on where they went. Oh, God, who's this guy? He was called Jeff Buckley. And I didn't know who he was, because I was just a square classical musician. No idea who he was. And he sang Dido's Lament by Purcell. And it killed me. It was the greatest single classical performance I've ever heard in my entire life. And I thought, I'm coming to Canada. The song he made famous, I think, for me, was a song by Leonard Cohen. And so I'd like to finish this. Thank you for listening. I'd like to play you Hallelujah by Leonard Cohen. And hum along when you get it. I'm going to record what I do while I play it, so any mistakes I make on the first loop will come back around and again, proving my point, I hope.